Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiegue, live today on June the 18th on a Tuesday to bring you guys some more storylines coming around the NFL. To start off today, I thought I'd talk more about Tua Tagovailoa, Jordan Love, and Dak Prescott, who will be the next quarterback to get paid. But not only that, which extension will benefit each of these teams the most if one was to get done before the others. Then we're going to talk some more contracts around a running back in Alvin Kamara. He missed the last day of mandatory minicamp, so we're going to get into the reason why, and could this be the final year for Kamara in a New Orleans Saints uniform. Then later on, more contract talks on Cam Hayward entering his final year of his contract, a longtime Steelers player. Could he potentially be on the last year with the Pittsburgh Steelers? He wants to play longer, so something has to give in those negotiations. I'm going to get into it as the show goes along. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And also, if you have any questions or comments, use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. By using this link, I'm able to see your question and comment, and that way get your guys' thoughts or perspective on anything I say or on any of the topics. And also, it's a massive help for this show and this network. So again, if you would, use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. But now, in saying that, I can start with the first topic, talking more on these quarterbacks and talking more about the situation on who is going to get the next contract extension. I think it's safe to say, was pretty surprised when Trevor Lawrence, not that he got his extension, but that he is now tied for the highest paid salary in the entire NFL, tied with Joe Burrow at $55 million per year. I was very surprised that he got that based on what he had done and the fact that the Jaguars had so much time, more time than the Packers, than the Cowboys, and the Dolphins have to extend their quarterbacks. I was surprised that the Jaguars got it done ahead of time. I commend them for doing that, but I think they got the price wrong. But regardless of that, now we look forward and to see who will potentially be getting the next contract extension. You look at guys like Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers. They've said they've wanted to get it done before training camp. The Dolphins and Tua, I saw some reports saying that they were starting to get into a ballpark of a reasonable contract salary for Tua, so maybe he could be closer than a lot of people expect. And then you have Dak Prescott, who, for me, is probably the furthest for a few reasons. One, I think his situation with the Cowboys, because they have two other contracts to worry about, it doesn't make too much sense to really stress getting Dak done if you could potentially lose the other two in Micah and CeeDee Lamb. I said it yesterday. I said, to me, Dak would probably be the second priority on my list. Even if he wasn't a quarterback, he still wouldn't be the number one priority on my list. I think just because all the talk about the quarterback, obviously the most important position, I think that really just boosts him up on the list of priorities for the Dallas Cowboys. But regardless of that, they have a weird situation there that I think they can't afford to lose any of the other two guys, and you can't have three of the highest paid players all on your team. So they have more time there to waste, but it also sort of works out in Dak's benefit because if he really isn't too bogged down on staying with the Dallas Cowboys, I think compared to Tua and Jordan Love, he has the strongest argument to make that he deserves another contract extension just because he has those years added on. He has more of a resume out there compared to Tua and Jordan Love, who just last year produced their best year of their careers. Dak could sit back, and if the Cowboys don't extend them, he could hit free agency and still wait the longest, but still potentially make the most money because someone is going to pay him. So that works out in Dak's benefit. I think he's probably the least likely to get paid sooner rather than later. So now you look at really Tua, Jordan Love, and I guess Dak will throw in there as well, just as a comparison to see where they are in terms of how much money they could be getting. If you look at Tua to start off, he's coming off of the best year of his career, the healthiest year of his career as well. He was first in the NFL in passing yards at 4,624. He was top 5 in touchdowns at 29 and third in completion percentage in the NFL as well. And all those stats and others are among the top statistical categories in the entire AFC. So if you look at just those quarterbacks in the AFC, I want to say 3 three of the top five quarterbacks right now getting paid the most are in the AFC. And Tua put up a stat sheet very close to what they did. He didn't get as far as they did in the playoffs, which is comparable to Dak Prescott in a sense, but Dak is in these conversations to get a ton of money. He and Tua have pretty much, apart from Dak getting to the playoffs a lot more, but he's also been in the league a lot longer. That's the only thing Dak really has ahead of Tua, that he's been to the playoffs more often. But they really, if you just take it in this short sample size for Tua and compare it to Dak's, they've almost had the same amount of playoff success. So that really doesn't bog down too much against Tua in terms of using that to leverage a higher salary for himself. And he also had an 11-6 season for the Miami Dolphins, which again isn't great, just depending on how they got there towards the end, surrendering the AFC East title to the Bills. But I think this is a great stepping point where the Dolphins got better over the offseason. If they can manage to keep Tua, I think it'll just be a pivotal piece to their team to try and build on this rather than trying to look for a new quarterback and sort of stunting that growth you've already seen with Tua, with Jalen Waddle, with Tyreek Hill, Raheem Mostert, David Achane, all these guys that are really just culminating together. If you take away one of them, especially the quarterback, it could really halt that. And then in the AFC East, where you have the Jets now, the Bills are still around there, maybe not so much the Patriots, but you get the point. The AFC as a whole is just very tough. You can't take away the quarterback and then just throw this season basically away without it even starting. So that's a case for Tua. For Jordan Love, similarly to Tua, he broke out this year as the first year as the starter. He was 7th in yards in the NFL, 2nd in touchdown passes, and top 5 in a lot of statistical categories in the NFC. Made it the furthest in the playoffs compared to Tua and to Dak Prescott, so he has that going for him. Is that enough to really say that he's going to continue to perform well in the playoffs? Probably not, but that is just the latest case of what we have to go on to determine how much money Jordan Love could make. And he makes a pretty good case for himself. Like again I mentioned, in the top 5 quarterbacks getting paid so far, only Jared Goff and I think Jalen Hurts, who is the 5th highest paid right now, are the two only NFC quarterbacks. So if you look at those two guys and how they performed in the playoffs, Jordan Love made it further than Jalen Hurts, arguably with a less talented team. And then you look at Jared Goff playing with the Detroit Lions compared to what Jordan Love had to play with in the Green Bay Packers situation. A lot of young teams, not enough experience there, so that goes against Jordan Love, but he performed very well. So I think that still holds some merit there. And then you move on a little bit further to Dak Prescott, just coming off of his best year, arguably of his career. At 30 years old, he's at a great age. Really, if the Cowboys, like again I mentioned, don't sign him and he goes out and tests free agency, he's in a very good stage right now where he could get another long-term contract, and he's still only 30 years old. The window of playing is a lot longer for quarterbacks, obviously, because no one can touch them. So he could potentially find a situation with maybe the Las Vegas Raiders or the Seattle Seahawks or just another team that needs a quarterback in free agency next year. They have the money to spend it. They could go out and do that and get Dak at a pretty reasonable price. If that's the only thing they're missing, Dak will just be sitting there, and I'm sure they're going to pay whatever it is to get him on their team. And then boom, right away they're a contender. And the Dallas Cowboys almost missed out in a way because they couldn't sign him. But all that being said, do I think any of these quarterbacks are worth $55 million? I'm a big proponent of paying these quarterbacks on what I see, on the production I see out of them. So based on what I've seen so far, I would probably say no, but that's probably not going to be the case. And just looking at it now, at which team sort of benefits the most from extending their quarterbacks a little bit more. If you look at the screen now, and so I listed out some bullet points to sort of make a point for each of them, what each of these teams have to consider when trying to extend their quarterback if they feel that is the best decision for them going forward. Starting with Dak Prescott and the Cowboys, they have other contracts to work out. Like I mentioned, the cap is not in an ideal spot for them. That's all that has been talked about so far this offseason. Why they couldn't sign any free agents, why it's taking so long to sign these extensions. The cap is a big problem, so signing Dak to a massive contract, then having to do it with Micah and CeeDee, doesn't add up there, doesn't make too much sense in the long term. Then the playoff success, again, I go back to that and think, have you reached the ceiling there? Maybe not with Dak, but maybe just with Dak combined with the Dallas Cowboys, if that makes sense. Maybe it's not just working out with Dak being on the Dallas Cowboys. Maybe he'll have more playoff success somewhere else, but it almost seems like this train has run its course, and pairing him up with the Dallas Cowboys even further and expecting something different might not, result in different outcomes. Then you look at Green Bay, a very young team, pretty lucky to have Jordan Love work out as well as he has so far, and you have to capitalize on this advantage, on the fact that everybody else is on a really cheap rookie deal so far, all your most important players pretty much. And if you do extend Jordan Love to a massive contract, he would really be the only massive contract that they have on their books. So that is also another advantage that they have to, take at this point, because you don't find yourself in these favorable situations often. You find yourself more often than not dealing with what Tua has to deal with Tyreek and Jalen Waddle making a lot of money. Same goes with Dak and having all these other great players on their team. Jordan Love is very fortunate, or I should say the Packers are very fortunate to be in this situation. So it's looking a little bit more likely for the Packers to extend them to benefit them in the long term. And then you get to Tua, similar in a way to, like I mentioned, Dak, and having these other players make a lot of money and coming off of one of your best years and healthiest years. Is that enough for the Dolphins to pay you over $50 million per year to try and continue this going on? He has those health concerns with the concussions. Jalen Waddle, like I mentioned, just got a lot of money. Tyreek wants more money, more guaranteed money in his deal. And again, you don't want to break up that chemistry, but again, does that fit all into the salary cap and working it out? You don't want to mess up the chemistry. And the Dolphins, I really believe, are trending upwards. So I would want to extend Tua, but for the right price at the end of the day would be my biggest deciding factor in all of this. So to me, I think Jordan Love is probably going to be the next one to get paid. And I think it benefits the Packers the most to do it sooner than these other two, because they could still get it under $55 million. And by doing that, they figure this thing all out. They have their quarterback now on a 4-year, 5-year deal, whatever it turns out to be. And they don't have to worry about too much because everybody else, like I mentioned, is on a cheap deal. But that's what I think. Let me know who you guys think will receive another massive extension in the quarterback market, and how much do you think they will get at the end of the day. But we'll put a pin in that conversation, and we're going to move on with the rest of the show. We have more topics, like I mentioned, to get to on today's episode, starting with after the break. We're going to talk about Alvin Kamara and missing the last practice of mandatory minicamp. Why that is, I'll explain that. And also Cam Hayward on the final year of his contract. What does that mean for him? What does that mean for the Steelers? Are they going to extend them? I'll give you guys all the details when I return in just a few seconds.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue on with the next segment on today's show. More contract talks, this time focusing in on one of the running backs, one of the highest paid running backs at that currently in the NFL, in Alvin Kamara. Like most teams, the New Orleans Saints concluded their mandatory minicamp last week on Thursday, and Alvin Kamara had been there for the majority of it through the first 2 days, but it was that last day, like I mentioned on Thursday, where he decided to not participate. And a little bit odd, because if you're going to do the first 2 days, why not just conclude it all and finish off the week practicing with the rest of the team? But reports say that Alvin Kamara was not present initially at the facility, or he was present at the facility, but he did not take part in the last practice for the New Orleans Saints. Then you had further reports saying from the NFL Network's Ian Rappaport confirming that Alvin Kamara did not participate because of the contract issues on his current deal with the New Orleans Saints. Ian Rappaport got that confirmation from his communication with Alvin Kamara's agent. So that seems to be the issue right now, and raising a lot more question marks around New Orleans and around the Saints as to why this is going on. What is wrong with Alvin Kamara's deal that could force him to miss the last practice of mandatory minicamp? Well, to give you guys some background around Kamara's deal, currently he has 2 years left on his contract, but those last 2 years are where the problem starts to come up, because the salary currently that Alvin Kamara is making is around $15 million per year, but in those last 2 years it will increase to 22.4 in 2025 and in 2026, and it will also cost the New Orleans Saints $29 million against their salary cap once that salary for Alvin Kamara does go up. So not the best of situations, obviously, for the Saints, already having enough salary cap problems as it is. Adding this onto it really puts them in a very bad situation on really just having any room to maneuver and do anything to try and improve this team, because right now they're really plateauing and staying right about where they are, 9-8, 8-9, 7-10, around those sort of records where, you know, as a fan, how could you get excited if your team really just isn't allowed or isn't able to make any moves to improve this team because of that bad salary cap situation? They have to try and improve it. They've been trying to improve it over the last few years, but this will certainly take a massive hit in all of their progress that they've made so far. And so far, sources close to Alvin Kamara have said that he wants a new deal before his salary cap does jump up, so that is a more positive thing for the New Orleans Saints, because usually players want more money when their deal is running out. So they are very fortunate that Kamara, according to these sources, say that he wants to figure out something else before that does jump up. Maybe just get more guaranteed money, but not as big a salary cap hit for the New Orleans Saints. But again, the problem comes up where not much progress is being made from both sides on negotiating a new contract. It's been pretty stale up until this point. There hasn't been really any updates, or we really haven't heard anything at all this offseason on any contract restructuring going on between the Saints and Alvin Kamara, which leads a lot of people to believe that the Saints could actually end up releasing him or just cutting him before the start of the next year. Probably before the start of the new league year. Next offseason would probably be a high likelihood that he gets cut by that time. So this year could be the final year potentially that we see Alvin Kamara in a New Orleans Saints uniform. And, you know, I think about that statement, and I do remember now that Alvin Kamara is 29 years old, and it just doesn't seem like that, because to me, I don't know if I'm just thinking wrongly about this, but it just seems like Kamara's only been in the league for about 4 years or something like that, or 3 years. But that could also have to do with the New Orleans Saints and just how, like I mentioned, how just average they've been, not really making too much noise. They bring in Derek Carr. Chris Olave's a nice piece, but other than that, just staying around the mid-tier level of teams. They have a solid defense, but offensively, they're not too exciting. So it's just been a lot of give and take so far with the Saints. And Alvin Kamara has been one of the most exciting players to watch and to support throughout this entire time. So to say that that could come to an end, it could benefit them salary cap-wise, like I said, but also what does that do for the level of your team, for the quality of your team, if Alvin Kamara does move on to somewhere else? And if he does move on, he currently sits as the highest paid running back in the NFL, currently at $50 million per year, still second to Christian McCaffrey, and the likelihood is that if he does move on, again at 29 years old, he'll most likely have to restructure that deal, because no one is going to want to sign him if his salary is going to go up that much. So a restructuring will almost certainly happen after and if Alvin Kamara does move on to another team. And once that does happen, the market price around him would probably be around, I can't imagine, no more than $10 million for a 29-year-old running back. As good as Alvin Kamara is, he doesn't have too much leverage to, push that number up a little bit more because he is coming off one of the least productive years of his career, only attaining 694 rushing yards, a total of 1,100 in scrimmage yards, and 6 touchdowns overall in 2023. Not the best and most eye-popping numbers for a guy, like I mentioned, at the level of Alvin Kamara on his best day. Maybe a year or two ago, he was making a lot of moves, making a lot of headlines, just carrying this Saints offense on his back, and now he really didn't do too much to alter their direction, really impacting games so far this year, or I should say overall last year. And with that being said, not too much leverage to take into contract negotiations. So where does that leave him? Could this be the final year for Alvin Kamara on the Saints? I probably would say so. I think it comes to a point, almost like Dak, when you're thinking about a quarterback and trying to get better, you keep getting to the same point and thinking you're doing all right, thinking you're at least not getting worse, but at the same time, if you're not getting worse, are you really actually really getting better? If you're just staying at the same point year in, and year in, thinking that eventually, you're going to grow a little bit more, I wouldn't buy that as a fan. I wouldn't be happy at all if I was a Saints fan and just seeing the same thing over and over and over again. It's been too long without seeing really any better results from the New Orleans Saints at this point, with the same crew coming back year in and year out, like I mentioned. There is a good chance now for the New Orleans Saints to take advantage of this situation and to go and get a little bit cheaper, not have a massive contract on their books, and take advantage of that. Maybe you don't have as high of quality on your team, but at the same time, that salary cap issue that you've been trying to fight off could get a little bit better. So at least one aspect of this entire puzzle is improving at that point, whereas you keep Alvin Kamara, you try and restructure something, and maybe you still finish with a 7-10, 8-9, 9-8 record, and you go out in the first round, and then really, what have you really gained, or what have you really improved upon at that point, especially in that division? Because if you look at someone like the Atlanta Falcons, they go out and make a big move for Kirk Cousins. They have Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts just itching to contribute to this offense, and a lot of people have bookmarked them to be the favorite, at least in that division, and make a lot of noise overall in the NFL. They're getting better. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers got better from last year, so now they're looking to grow a little bit more. I would even say the Carolina Panthers have gotten a lot better, revamping their offensive line, trading for Deontay Johnson, drafting Xavier Legette from the University of South Carolina. So they're making moves. They're trying to get better. And the Saints are so deadlocked because of the salary cap issue. And if you have to get rid of Alvin Kamara, even though it's going to be extremely tough to move on from a player of his quality, I think you have to do it at this point. Something has to give to at least try something different if you're the New Orleans Saints to get better results. And if you don't get better results, at least you know and aren't just sit there getting the same results and just wondering what could happen if we do this, what could happen if we do that. You have to take action at this point. For me, it's gonna be tough. It's not gonna be good once and if this news does break of the Saints moving on from Alvin Kamara. But that is the running back market also at this point. Not a lot of them stay past 1 year extension with their teams. I think a lot of them would say they'd be pretty lucky to stay with one team past the first extension. Similar situation with Najee Harris and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Not a lot of running backs stay with that same team for the majority of their career, just based on the running back market. So this wouldn't surprise me at all. And the Saints could, in a way, take a step backwards to try and gain 2 steps forward in the long run to try and improve and get better results. That's just me and how I feel about it. The salary cap really isn't something favorable for the Saints, and at the same time, with Alvin Kamara, I think he could, if he does move on from the Saints, go on to a different team, and maybe he produces better, has more juice in his legs, and he could get back to that Alvin Kamara we know and love. So that also could be a positive for Kamara and the Saints if the contract negotiations don't move on any further in the next few weeks before training camp or during training camp. I think it would be written on the wall that, this is just coming to an end. We can ride off into the sunset in 2024 and then just go our separate ways. That's how I feel about it. If there's any Saints fans listening, tell me how you guys feel about it. But I think 2024 will probably be the last year for Kamara in a Saints uniform. And in saying that, we're going to move on with the rest of the show. Another break coming up, and then on the other side, we're going to talk some more contracts, shifting over to the AFC and focusing in on Cam Hayward and his situation with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's trying to play a little bit longer, but will the Steelers cough up enough money to keep him satisfied and keep him in Pittsburgh for the foreseeable future? We'll talk about that more after the break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Back now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about another pivotal piece to one of the teams in the NFL, now mentioning Cam Hayward and his search for a new contract extension. Potentially with the Pittsburgh Steelers, Cam Hayward will be entering the final year of his contract in 2024. He is scheduled to be a free agent in 2025, obviously on his current deal. That pays him around $16 million per year. Not the highest paid defensive lineman, so that could be another incentive for Cam Hayward maybe to try and get a little bit more money in his extension, or just maybe some more guaranteed money for being 34 years old, playing in the league a long time. You still want to get your money's worth for going out there, putting in a lot more effort to be out there because you are a little bit older. That could be some incentives for Cam Hayward in his search for a new contract. Will that be with the Pittsburgh Steelers? Well, Cam Hayward has spent 14 seasons so far in the NFL with the Pittsburgh Steelers. They drafted him back in 2011, and so far this year, up until minicamp, he hasn't been present at any of the practices or taking part really in any of the drills with the rest of his teammates. But again, not something to write home about too much, just because, like I mentioned, he's been in the league for so long. It's not like he necessarily needs these reps. The fact that he's there, I think, is enough at this point for someone of his experience. I don't really think Cam Hayward is really considering moving on. I think right now, if anything, he's at the midway point of deciding to stay or go. I would probably say he re-signs, but not being there, I don't think makes me believe that he's closer to one side or the other. The fact that he is just there giving some help out to the younger players, being more of a coach out there for a Keanu Benton, for a Nick Herbig, for even Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt, just for them to be out there and see him there, I think that's enough, and that it isn't like a situation with T. Higgins or with Brandon Ayuk or any of those guys like that are looking for contract extensions. This is a little bit different because of his experience in the NFL. But in saying that, talking about experience, he just turned 35 in May and isn't thinking about just a one-year extension, just to ride it off into the sunset with the Pittsburgh Steelers. The idea so far has been floated out there that he's thinking about maybe 2 or 3 more years to play in the NFL. He obviously still believes that he could produce at a high level with whoever he plays with. Most likely, I think the Steelers give him the best chance to produce at a high level, even if he's not doing too much, playing alongside a guy like TJ Watt, like Alex Highsmith, with Patrick Queen behind you, with Keanu Benton there alongside you, I think gives you the best opportunity because those other guys attract a lot more attention from an offensive line. So doing that, I think, really helps out Cam Hayward a lot more. I don't know how productive he could be somewhere else. I guess it just depends on where he goes, but I don't see him being too different or too much more of an impact maker if he does decide to move on to a different team. That's just me trying to put my bias aside as a Steelers fan, but that's so far where it all stands with Cam Hayward. How much could he want, and how much are the Pittsburgh Steelers willing to give him in a new offer for Cam Hayward? He said in the past that he wants to be a one-helmet type of guy. He wants to stay with one team, ideally, his entire NFL career. And this past weekend on Father's Day, he also sort of reiterated that when he posted a message on social media saying that the goal is to be a Steeler for the rest of my career. And he also gave out a Happy Father's Day salute out there. But the most important part is obviously that first part of that statement. He said he wants to be a Steeler the rest of his career. So ideally, I would incline myself to think that he wants to stay. But obviously, money is an important factor in all of this for someone who is 35 years old to go out there and put his body on the line. It does make sense that he will prioritize a lot in this situation with the money, with his family even. That takes me to my next point where earlier, before this past weekend on Father's Day, he had an interview with Mark Kaboly of The Athletic to where he said, Cam Hayward, he said, "I have talked to my wife and we know the reality and we have had those talks, and she said it could be fun to play somewhere else. If that is what is needed to be done, then so be it." So it looks like he's keeping an open mind to it, but again, I'm not really buying it because if he wants to play that much longer, it doesn't make too much sense for me. As good of a player as you are, you're going to have a transition point, a transition period where you have to get acclimated to everybody, to your new teammates, a new system that you're just not accustomed to. And if you're 35 years old and you want to play 2 to 3 more years, you have to maximize those as much as possible. And it doesn't make too much sense to almost waste time in trying to acclimate yourself to a brand new environment that you're not really too familiar with. It just doesn't add up to producing at your best for me if I was Cam Hayward and I was putting all these things into consideration. I think he just really wants to apply a little bit more pressure to the Steelers to try and get something figured out with him. That leads me to my next point, talking about the Steelers and their extensions. It's almost a organizational policy with the Pittsburgh Steelers that they don't typically or hardly ever negotiate a contract extension during the regular season. I can't remember the last time they did that, announced a contract extension during the regular season. So at this point, it seems like once that first day comes, that first Sunday of the regular season comes, if there's no contract extension, it's not going to get done, and that player's most likely going to hit free agency. It goes similarly with what Najee Harris has to deal with, the Steelers not picking up his fifth-year option, and also Justin Fields as well. Cam Hayward probably has up until that point to figure out a contract extension, but what's interesting about this now, does he not skip out training camp, because I think he'll still be there, but is he going to be as active as he would be in years past? Is he just going to be off to the side, working on things on his own, really just trying not to get hurt and lose any sort of leverage that he has going into 2024? I'll be interested to see how that plays out, but the Steelers, again, very much traditional and just die hard to their traditions and their policies that they're not going to negotiate anything once the regular season starts, for obvious reasons. They don't want to make it a distraction. They don't want to take it away from football. So I'd like that they do that, but at the same time, it just puts an earlier deadline on this whole situation if you can't agree on anything with one of your most impactful players, one of the leaders of this team. If you can't agree on something towards the end of August, beginning of September, then it's really looking like a dull situation for Cam Hayward to stay with the Pittsburgh Steelers if nothing is figured out by then. Also, you have to mention the idea of negotiating that new contract with Najee Harris. Almost who did the Steelers prioritize in these two contracts? Najee Harris with how the running back market is. Will Najee want a little bit more money than the Steelers are willing to give up to a running back? Is it going to affect Cam Hayward in any way and trying to give him his money if they also want to keep Najee Harris? Maybe they're going to have to give something up. I don't know the main specifics around how the Steelers salary cap is looking as of right now. So that's just something else that almost Cam Hayward and his people have to compete with in a sense, but not really. I'm sure both of them want to stay on the Steelers. They want to see each other stay on the Steelers, but could this be the last year for Cam Hayward? I don't see it being that way. I don't see Cam Hayward moving on just because I think this is too comfortable of a situation where he knows what everything is. He knows the regimen. He knows the schedule, the routine of everything. He's comfortable here. He's had success here. He had to deal with injuries a lot last season, so that sort of bummed him out. That sucked overall for the Steelers to have Cam Hayward not really be there. He wants to sort of bounce back from that, and I think really just running full speed into it and having no transition period on trying to learn yourself a new system, going somewhere else potentially. I think that gives him the best chance of doing that, but I don't know. With the contract stuff, anything could really happen. Some guys could get paid a lot more. Some guys could get offered a lot less than they think they're worth, and then they just have to settle for something else. It is what it is for Cam Hayward. Heck, even if he does hit free agency, maybe he doesn't like the market out there for any team that's offering him a contract. Maybe they're not valuing him as high as he would have thought, and then he still ends up with the Steelers. But at that point, it would turn out a lot worse for Cam if he hits free agency, decides or realizes that there's not a big market out there for him. Then the Steelers don't feel too inclined to pay as high of an asking price as they would have right now during training camp. All of those are just factors that come into this. I'm sure it'll all get figured out. I think these two are too married to each other to not work something out for the level of respect. And the Steelers are very much so very honorable in how they treat all their players, all of their legends, so to speak. So I don't think this will get very toxic in a way. I think it'll actually end up happening. I wouldn't be surprised if his deal gets done ahead of Najee Harris and Najee hits free agency. That's just how I see it, how the Steelers tend to do business. But let me know what you guys think about this. Is Cam Hayward bluffing in a sense, or will he really consider leaving the Steelers in free agency in 2025? That is all for that segment. That is all the updates so far on this Cam Hayward situation with the Steelers. So we're going to go to another quick break, and when we return, more running back rankings around the NFL, this time in the AFC West. The last segment of this series before I move on and find something else, talking about the Raiders, the Broncos, the Chargers, and the reigning Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs. So stick around, we have that to talk about, and the early impressions from Marvin Harrison at mandatory minicamp for the Arizona Cardinals. Those two segments are coming up in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Before I get into the running back rankings, I want to remind you guys one last time on this show, if you have any questions or comments you want to make, use the tip and donations link on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that link, I'm able to see your question or comment. I'll read it out loud on air, and that way get any of your guys' thoughts or perspective on any of the topics we have left on this show. It's a massive help for the network, so if you guys would, please use the tip and donations link if you have any comment or question to make on the remainder of today's show. But like I mentioned, moving on to the running back rankings, this time in the AFC West, talking the last division in these running backs mini-series that I have had going on so far in these shows. We'll start lastly at the AFC West, and a very tough ranking on how I graded these running backs just because there's not a lot of big names per se, and they're all very close in proximity in terms of production and what they offer and projecting them and how well they could be in 2024. So my mindset into ranking these teams was pretty difficult. So without further ado, going into number 4, I have the Las Vegas Raiders. Zamir White there on your left and their new running back Alexander Mattison on your right. They added Alexander Mattison this offseason to complement Zamir White, so that is a benefit rather than just having it all so dependent on Zamir White. He did have some flashes last year in some games where he did perform a lot better than I thought because I just didn't really know too much about him. So you have him. You don't want to put too much on him right away. So you bring on a guy like Alexander Mattison, add a little bit more depth there. Plus, you already had Amir Abdullah on the team as well. So that's a good, running back group to have on your team. But in terms of production, they ranked 30th in total yards last year in the rushing department, just above 1,500. Then also 30th in the NFL in yards per game at 90 rushing yards per game. So not too dependent on the running game to win them games, that's for sure. So they don't really have a big standout name on this running back group where you look at them and think, they win because of this guy. It's more so a running back by committee to share the workload and get the best out of all of them. If one's not on his best day and maybe you have another one that is all right, you can try and piece something together from this running back group. Not too much known around them. They don't have a massive reputation built around them in the NFL because they are just sort of getting into that limelight of trying to produce for the Las Vegas Raiders. So not a lot of security there per se. And if you look at this team, especially with how well they drafted and got better at the tight end position and the receiving group, if you compare it to the receiving group, even the quarterback situation on offense, even their offensive line, you would probably say the running back is the least productive or the most lacking compared to the wide receivers and the offensive line and the quarterback. That's just how I see it. The Raiders could maybe get something from this running back group, but you don't really have too much to base it off of. So that's why they are ranked at number 4 for me. Then moving on to number 3, the Denver Broncos. It might be one of the only times they're not ranked at 4 in these position group rankings, but at running back, I really like Javonte Williams there on your left. He had a very good rookie year. He almost recorded 1,000 yards just right off the bat out of college, but then he tore his ACL in his second year, and last year he was sort of coming back. It's not easy coming back, obviously, from an ACL injury right after the year that it happened. I wouldn't know from experience. I've never, fortunately, had that happen to me, but from other times you see it where other players are starting to come back from those injuries, especially in a sport like football. You're constantly getting hit, maybe getting hit low a lot of the times. You still have a little bit of that fear or uneasiness there, and I don't blame for Javonte Williams for a down year last year, but this year it just puts a little bit more onus on him to try and perform and carry this backfield because there's a lot of newness in the quarterback room. You still have Courtland Sutton, but you lost Jerry Jeudy. You bring in Josh Reynolds. There's not a lot of continuality on this team other than Javonte Williams, so he's going to be looked upon to try and lead this team a little bit more from that running back position. But then you look at who you have besides him. That is Jaleel McLaughlin there to your right. He was their second leading rusher last year, and you guys, I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't know too much about Jaleel McLaughlin, but that is what they're working with right now. They have Samaje Perine and Audric Estime also on their team. Audric Estime was a rookie they drafted in this year's draft, so they have the numbers, I guess you could say, but in terms of production, just based off of last year, they were ranked around the 15 to 16 range on, or I should say 15 to 19 range in terms of total rushing yards, just above 1,800, and also they averaged 106 yards per game, which again was around the midway point in the NFL. Nothing too special, but I think Javonte Williams just edges it out a little bit for me ahead of the Las Vegas Raiders. And what they could expect from Javonte, I think he's very talented. So this year, now his 4th year in the NFL, I'm expecting that second-year jump per se, that he didn't get an opportunity to show out in his second year because he tore his ACL. I think we're going to get a little bit more from him in his fourth year to help out that offense, whether it's Bo Nix or Zach Wilson starting for them. They're going to need a dependable running game to have any sort of success in 2024. Then moving on to number 2, speaking of being healthy and ACLs and just having a healthy season finally, really at the end of the day, we're going to go on to the Los Angeles Chargers. That man on your right, talking about ACLs, J.K. Dobbins has to stay healthy this year. Was signed to the Los Angeles Chargers. I thought was a great move for them because not only did it reunite him with Gus Edwards there on your left, but on his healthiest day, when these two are together, I don't think you have two other reliable running backs on any other team in the AFC West other than these two. But again, I have to stress, on their healthiest day, it is a big gamble because, again, like J.K. Dobbins has not been the healthiest of running backs as of late. I want to say tearing his Achilles, his ACL, in both of them, one in 1 year, another one in another year. It's a big gamble, really, for the Chargers to sign him and expect something differently from him, but he's still very young, and in his first year or in his earlier years with the Baltimore Ravens, you sort of got a little glimpse of what he could really be, how hard he runs, how elusive he is, what he brings in the passing game. Once he's all healthy and it's all there continually, he could be a very dynamic piece for them in 2024, especially with the identity now that they're trying to implement to this team. Not too much passing, but a lot heavier on the running game. Gus Edwards is a massive back, a massive build to him. He's going to be extremely hard to tackle. They got better at the offensive line by drafting Joe Alt. They bring in J.K. Dobbins, who you don't have to have out there each and every play. That's sort of what you brought in Gus Edwards to do. So you sort of salvage J.K. Dobbins a little bit more there, not having him out there, not risking him maybe getting hurt if you overwork him too much. You could sort of sprinkle him in at the beginning, and then if you are confident in having him out there, you could bring him out for a lot more plays in 2024. But they didn't rank too high last year in terms of running the rock, but they had a whole different personnel and a whole different identity last year that I think this year it's going to suit them a lot better with running the ball as their first option. Maybe it'll be weird at first for Justin Herbert, who all he has done in the NFL so far is throw it, but I'd like the Chargers, if they could stay healthy. This duo is the best duo in the AFC West, but that injury concern couldn't have me putting them at number 1, which means, like always, the Chiefs, I think for the quarterback, the receivers, and obviously now the running backs, the Chiefs have been number 1. And that's what happens when you win the Super Bowl, I guess, is you get to be considered the number 1 on a lot of people's rankings. They're number 1 in the running back department because they produce very well for not having your most typical of running backs, other than Isaiah Pacheco, and how hard he runs, how dynamic he is when he has enough space to move around and, produce as well as he does. It's weird he hasn't had a 1,000-yard rushing year yet, but it seems like he does, and he does very well for them in what they have him do. And comment from Eric here, the Chargers are going to look so different this year. No Williams, no Eckler, no Keenan. It is crazy, Eric. I do agree with you. Like I mentioned, it's going to be very weird for Justin Herbert to try and adapt to that. Once you build up a habit like that and trying to throw it, almost be the hero so much, it's going to be very hard to pull away from that. But I don't know. It almost seems like the Chargers are one of the only teams now that aren't trying to outscore you or aren't trying to outpass you in the NFL. And I kind of like it that they're taking a different approach to it. It doesn't surprise me that it's Jim Harbaugh and trying to do that. Will it work out? Maybe. We're just going to have to wait and see. But I like that they're trying something a little bit different, and they're not just trying to overdo it on the offensive side of the ball and trying to overpass it, if that makes sense. But the Chiefs are almost a team that do that with, obviously, Patrick Mahomes. Why wouldn't you? But in terms of running the ball, although Isaiah Pacheco has more recognition around the league and his production is higher, he does sort of bring this different dynamic to the Chiefs where it's not so much about finesse with Isaiah Pacheco, if that makes sense. He's more so sort of in your face, punching you in the mouth, getting those extra hard-earned runs that I don't think much of this Chiefs offense is revolved around that, so that is something that he brings. And then you look at Jerick McKinnon there in the middle and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, not the most productive runners, but in the passing game and out of the backfield, and just how Andy Reid uses them in his system. They fit perfectly for the Chiefs offense, and even though they're not out there every single time, they do seem to just pop up in the most crucial of points. Again, having to do with this Andy Reid system of all the motions and the just trying to confuse the defense before the snap of the ball with who's in the backfield, who's lined up where. It's very interesting how they do it, and all three of these guys play a prominent role into that. And if they don't produce the highest of rushing numbers, it doesn't really matter with the Chiefs, because you can't really fault a team that won the Super Bowl doing it this way. It's hard to do it. I won't be the one to do it. So the Chiefs are number one on my list, like they have been almost in all of my rankings so far. Let me know what you guys think of them. Do you think the Chargers were maybe a little bit too high? Am I not giving enough credit to the Denver Broncos and what they've had to deal with throughout this period of Russell Wilson, Sean Payton, and all this salary cap issues? Leave your thoughts in the comments section down below. But we have one more segment to talk about after this break. We're going to get into Marvin Harrison, a highly touted wide receiver out of Ohio State. What can we expect out of him in his rookie year with the Arizona Cardinals? I'm going to give you guys my thoughts on that and what is being said about Marvin Harrison Jr. in the mandatory minicamp for the Arizona Cardinals. So stick around. We have one more segment to get to right after this. Back here now for the last segment on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Just looking over some of the rookies and keeping up to date with them as the offseason goes on. Now focusing in on Marvin Harrison Jr., selected as the first non-quarterback in this year's draft. Marvin Harrison has been another young prospect to shine for their team early on through mandatory minicamps and OTAs. With all of that sort of fiasco going on at the beginning of this offseason with the Fanatics issue, with the jerseys not being on sale yet for the Arizona Cardinals, that sort of took center stage around Marvin Harrison Jr. And then once we got past that, it seemed to flow right into what I expected to be one of the easiest transitions for a guy that I've said before, to me, is one of the most ready players in draft history that I've seen recently, in just recent memory that I've been following the draft and covering it. I said it before the draft and before any of the conversation really started happening that you could take Marvin Harrison back in February and in March, stick him in any offense, and he'd be okay to really just fly in there and play right away. He was ready from the start of this college season and even before that, and it obviously helps having your dad be one of the great wide receivers, obviously, in the NFL. I think that and his maturity, how he's grown, and the skill set, obviously, that he brings physically and just on his ability on his own, I think just makes him one of the most complete wide receivers in the NFL already. It's crazy to say, but I think that highly of him. You get to a point sometimes with these wide receivers that that come in at a level like a Justin Jefferson, maybe a Devontae Smith to a certain extent, a CeeDee Lamb, a Malik Nabers this year as well. You come in, you see them on tape, and just some of the things they do, some of the skill set they bring is so good and just so undeniably just fine-tuned and really smooth that I can't help but think anything other than they're going to be extremely efficient at the next level. And that's so far what has been happening with Marvin Harrison Jr. Head coach Jonathan Gannon has said that Harrison has met and even exceeded all expectations so far that he had of him, already lining up as the number one wide receiver during minicamp that started last Tuesday. And the biggest component will be the chemistry aspect, obviously, with Kyler Murray. Murray's never had a wide receiver like Marvin Harrison Jr., at least from my recent memory that I could bring up in this conversation. Larry Fitzgerald was up there, but he was towards the tail end of his career. Now with Marvin, just getting him into the NFL right as Kyler Murray is entering his prime, so to say, or the most crucial years of his career, this couldn't have lined up any better because this offense really needed an influx of something like this, just an undeniable talent that you could throw the ball to. If he's covered, he's not really covered. He's open at all times, and it's going to help them out tremendously because, again, Kyler Murray does have the ability to buy time back there, get and wait for other receivers to get open because it is extremely hard to tackle him. To have Marvin Harrison out there, he's not going to get doubled right away, obviously. As highly as I talk of him, he's not going to get doubled right away or be seen as a major threat because he is still a rookie. So that should give a little bit of an inclination to us and think that right away we could see Marvin Harrison really produce at a high level if he comes in healthy, everything's going smoothly, and heading into that first game, if he has nothing else to worry about, I see him stepping right into the limelight and being a superstar for the Arizona Cardinals. And last season, the Arizona Cardinals, just based on the production they got from this position, they were the 7th fewest team in receiving yards in the NFL at 4,430. The lead receiver, Marquise Brown, only put up 574 yards. And like I mentioned, having a father like Marvin Harrison have you prepare for this moment and know really everything that you need to know of being a professional and very good player at this level has helped Marvin Harrison Jr. tremendously. And it goes without saying, just the production that you see from Marquise Brown last year and what you could potentially get from Marvin Harrison Jr. is almost night and day. No disrespect to Marquise Brown, but I just think Marvin, almost if you're building a wide receiver on Madden or something like that, in your mind, you're thinking of someone to build it like, have the skill set like, you're going to build it like Marvin Harrison Jr. That's just how he is. He's a freak out there, and he's going to be a very good asset to the Arizona Cardinals. And further, another comment from Eric, do you think Harrison Jr. will blow up like Jamar Chase? That's a good question. With Kyler Murray always a threat to leave the pocket and run, it should create opportunities for him down the field. I think so. It is a little tough just because Jamar and that connection he had with Joe Burrow, I think that helps so much to have already been playing with your quarterback for, I think, a year or two in college at LSU. Then you just continue that on. Very lucky to continue that on in the NFL. It almost makes it a lot easier. It definitely makes it a lot easier, but it just makes it so much of a smoother transition in all aspects to come into the pros now with somebody that you have such a great connection with. I can't imagine how much easier it makes that for any player, but at the same time, with Marvin and Kyler, I think Marvin is so good at this point that it's not going to take too long for them to be on the same page, really, when you have a guy at this sort of level. And they are built a little bit different, so that also helps. And I also think that most people would agree that Joe is a better quarterback than Kyler Murray, so you have also that aspect of it. But in terms of what I can expect from him and my expectations for Marvin Harrison Jr., he's definitely going to make the Cardinals better. They finished with a 4-13 record last year, so it's hard to get even worse than that with adding a guy like Marvin Harrison. And to give my prediction on what we can expect, I really thought about this. I have a stat line of what we could expect from Marvin Harrison, and I just came up with expecting 86 yards from him in his first year, over 1,000 yards, and probably around 5 to 6 touchdowns in my estimation. That's the stat line, 86 receptions, over 1,000 yards, 5 to 6 touchdowns in his first year. as that lead receiver for the Arizona Cardinals. I think he's going to be that good to receive 86 receptions. He's definitely going to be the number one target. They have Trey McBride there as the tight end, if I got his name right. But they have a good tight end. Their offense is definitely better with James Conner than their defense. Their defense is what scares me the most, and if they're capable of being in a shootout with teams, this certainly helps adding Marvin Harrison, but I think their defense is really lacking, and they're not really built to stop high-powered offenses yet. So that's definitely the weaker part of this team, but offense has definitely gotten better. I think Kyler showed a lot of potential in the last few games that he did come back from injury last year to sort of be confident in building something about that in 2024, where you're going to have your whole team healthy and Kyler right at the start of the season. Again, Eric, what do you got? We got my league draft next month. From a fantasy perspective, should he be picked up in the first few rounds? That's a tough question. Fantasy is something you got to sit down and really think about. Marvin Harrison in the first few rounds. What are we considering first few rounds? Anything earlier than maybe 4, I wouldn't do per se. I think 4 is the absolute earliest I would get him. I don't know how many teams you have in your fantasy league, or if it's PPR or anything like that. We do PPR, and it's 10 players in our league, so really getting to the 4th round, 5th round is still pretty early. I don't know if you have more than that. If you have more than that, then 4th round, 3rd round would probably not be too crazy. But if you have anything less than 12 or something like that, and you have another 10-man league, I would say earlier than 5 or 4 might be a little bit too high for him, but he is certainly going to be good. I have a lot of high expectations for him. And also, as the final point for this segment, you have Kyler Murray on 10 guys on this fantasy team. Yeah, so you're almost rocking with the same amount that I am, or exactly the same amount. So I think you wait till after the 4th, potentially after the 5th round, and if he's still there, to have him on your bench potentially, or as a flex option, that's the way I would go. I'm a little skeptical on rookies, just depending on how good they are. I would like to wait on them, so anything before 4 or 5, I think is a little bit too early, but, fantasy drafts are crazy in saying that. But like I mentioned on this last point I was talking about, Kyler Murray just came in and got a massive 5-year, $230 contract extension in 2022. So bringing in Marvin Harrison Jr. to help out Kyler Murray, I think is a great move to almost validate that contract that you gave Kyler, because now you're putting him in a good spot to where if he doesn't perform well, then you have another tough decision to work out. But you have certainly done everything that you need to do to help out Kyler, to make this offense a lot better. Drafting arguably the best receiver in the NFL draft this year, I think, was certainly going to help out this team. They're in a tough division, so it's going to be even more exciting. I think he's going to have a great year. Let me know what you guys think of Marvin Harrison Jr. Am I hyping him up too much, or maybe not enough in some of your guys' estimation? But that is the end of that segment, and that will be all on today's show of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I want to thank you guys for tuning in yet again. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe, and also checking out the network on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of the network's content. And also, if you want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel on YouTube for a lot more content around the NFL. And as a final reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more conversations and discussions around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiegue, as your host. Thanking you guys again for joining me, and I'll see you guys all back here again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.